You know, for centuries, we've tried to put rules on the chaos of war. We've built these codes of conduct, these international laws, all designed to draw a line in the sand. But what happens when the very nature of war itself changes? When your enemy doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't represent a country? Well, the old rules start to break. And we have to ask, what comes next?
And that right there is the million-dollar question for so many nations today. The old playbook, the one written for when one state fights another state, it just doesn't work against these decentralized global networks. It's a huge challenge, and it's forcing us to rethink everything we thought we knew about war and about peace.
So, let's get into it. The heart of the problem is that our traditional rulebook for war, which took generations to build, was designed for a world of nations with clear borders and professional armies. But the threats we face today, they don't care about any of those lines on a map.
Right, and that's because modern threats like transnational terrorism thrive on what's called asymmetrical warfare. Basically, they don't play by the old rules because they know they can't win that way. Instead, they exploit the weaknesses in the system. They operate in these gray zones, both legally and geographically, which makes a standard military response really, really difficult, and honestly, often makes things worse.
To really understand why these old rules are failing, we need to take a quick look at what they actually are. For hundreds of years, the main framework has been something called just war theory. The easiest way to think about it is like a moral checklist that countries are supposed to run through before, during, and after a war.
Okay, so just war theory really boils down to two big ideas. First, you've got jus ad bellum. That's just Latin for the right to go to war. These are the questions you ask before you start fighting. Then there is jus in bello, or justice in war. Those are the rules for how you're supposed to behave on the actual battlefield. So put simply, the checklist asks, is it right for us to fight? And are we fighting in the right way?
Now, theory is one thing, but the real test is always reality. To see how this checklist holds up under pressure, we're going to look at the case of Kenya. It's a country that's been dealing with two very different, very modern threats that really push this old framework to its absolute limit.
And right away, the problem becomes crystal clear. On one hand, you've got Al-Shabaab, a group driven by a religious ideology that completely rejects all those international rules we just talked about. But on the other hand, you have maritime piracy, which has nothing to do with ideology. It's born from pure economic desperation and a total breakdown of government. So you have two different non-state actors posing two completely different challenges.
So how did Kenya respond to Al-Shabaab? With military force. They launched Operation Linda-Ninchi, justifying it as self-defense, which, by the way, is a clear checkmark on that jus ad bellum list. But here's the thing. Instead of solving the problem, the intervention led to absolutely devastating retaliatory attacks inside Kenya. In the language of just war theory, it completely failed a critical test, having a reasonable chance of success. It just made everything worse.
Now let's look at the piracy problem, because here the checklist gets even messier. Of course, nations have a just cause to protect shipping lanes, but the source material for this explainer shows a much more complicated backstory. Turns out, piracy in that region exploded as a direct response to years of illegal fishing and toxic waste dumping by foreign ships that destroyed local fishing communities. The pirates actually see themselves as defenders of their own waters. So how does a neat little checklist handle a mess like that? It really doesn't.
So it's pretty clear the old checklist is struggling, right? And this brings up a much bigger question. If the framework we've relied on for centuries can't handle these new threats, are we missing something? Maybe we need to look for answers somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the battlefield.
This is the real turning point. The failure of this old model suggests that maybe, just maybe, we've been framing the entire problem the wrong way. We've been so focused on the symptoms of the violence, we've completely missed the disease.
And this is where a different approach called Critical Security Studies, or CSS for short, comes into the picture. Now, it doesn't just throw out the old rules. Instead, it adds a new lens. It forces us to ask one very simple, very powerful question. Why do these groups exist in the first place? It digs deeper, looking for the real root causes of a conflict.
And when you apply this lens to our examples, the picture becomes so much clearer. The source material shows that Al-Shabaab isn't just some abstract evil force. It actually gets its power by tapping into the very real frustrations of marginalized communities. And piracy isn't just random crime. It's a desperate reaction to economic and environmental ruin. Suddenly you realize these aren't just military problems. At their core, they're problems of justice.
So what do we do with all this? We can't just throw out the rules that are designed to protect innocent people. But we also can't just keep ignoring what's actually causing the fighting. The real path forward seems to be about combining the best of both of these worlds. The solution, then, is really a two-track strategy. Step 1, you use just war theory for what it does best, as an ethical guardrail to limit violence and protect civilians. But you can't stop there. Step 2 is using the insights from critical security studies to actually fix the underlying problems, the poverty, the injustice, the marginalization that creates the fighters in the first place.
The research we're drawing from here puts it perfectly. You can't get lasting security by only treating the symptoms. You have to go after the structural causes. I mean, it's the difference between constantly putting out fires and actually making the whole building fireproof.
And all of this leaves us with a really fundamental question to think about. For generations, we've basically defined security by the strength of our armies. But what if real, lasting security isn't won on a battlefield at all? What if it's actually won by fixing the injustices that create the battle in the first place?